The morning Marcus Webb drove to work, the sky was the color of old pewter and the highway smelled like rain that hadn't arrived yet. He had his coffee in the cup holder, his daughter's drawing of a horse taped to the dashboard, and a podcast about baseball statistics playing through the car speakers. It was Tuesday, April 14th. An ordinary Tuesday. He remembered that detail later, specifically, the ordinariness of it. Because ordinary Tuesdays don't end with the world holding its breath. Marcus was 38 years old, and he worked as a logistics coordinator for the Federal Emergency Management Agency's Central Dispatch Hub in Columbus, Ohio. His job, most days, involved spreadsheets and phone calls and scheduling delivery routes for supplies going to places that had experienced floods or tornadoes or the occasional industrial accident. He was good at his job. He was not, by any stretch of imagination, the kind of man who expected to be at the center of the most significant moment in human history. He pulled into the parking garage at 8:47 a.m. By 9:03 a.m., every television screen in the building was showing the same feed. His colleague Dana Reyes found him in the hallway, her face doing something complicated, not quite fear, not quite disbelief, something that existed in the space between the two. "Marcus," she said, "you need to come see this." The break room was already crowded. People stood with their coffee mugs raised halfway to their mouths, forgotten. Someone had turned the volume all the way up on the wall-mounted television, and the newscaster's voice filled the room with a particular kind of careful calm that broadcasters use when they are deeply, profoundly not calm at all. Confirmed by 17 independent observatories across 6 continents, the objects entered Earth's upper atmosphere approximately 40 minutes ago at coordinates spanning what appears to be every major continent simultaneously. The objects are not, we repeat, are not, displaying any aggressive behavior. They are descending slowly. Military sources confirm that no weapons systems have been activated. The president is currently... Marcus stared at the screen. The footage was grainy at first, shot from a news helicopter somewhere over the American Midwest. But even through the grain you could see them. They filled the sky like vast, slow-falling leaves, enormous curved shapes, each one somewhere between the size of an aircraft carrier and a small city block. They were dark, almost black, but they caught the morning light in strange ways, their surfaces shifting between matte and glossy as they moved. And they were everywhere. Not just one. Not just a dozen. Thousands. "Holy," someone behind Marcus whispered and didn't finish the sentence. His phone buzzed. Then buzzed again. Then started a continuous vibration as the alerts stacked up. His supervisor, Janet Bloom, texted him 3 words in all capitals. "Get to conference room." He got to conference room. By noon the objects had landed. That word, landed, was both accurate and completely insufficient. They didn't crash. They didn't hover dramatically or send down beams of light. They simply settled. Like enormous, tired animals lowering themselves to rest. They came down in fields and in desert plains and in stretches of tundra and in the shallow waters off coastlines. They avoided cities with what seemed like deliberate precision. No buildings crushed. No roads blocked. They chose the empty spaces. That detail alone, the care with which they chose where to land, would be discussed by xenobiologists and military analysts and amateur theorists for years afterward. It was the first sign, though no one fully understood it yet, that whoever was inside those ships had done their homework on humanity. By 2 p.m. the ships had opened. Not with weapons fire. Not with some dramatic ramp descending to reveal sleek figures in chrome armor. The sides of the ships simply parted. The material pulled back like a curtain, and from within, from every one of the thousands of ships, people came out. People. That was the first word that passed through Marcus's mind when he saw the footage, and it was not quite right but it was not quite wrong either. They were humanoid. Bipedal. 2 arms, 2 legs, a head situated on a neck. But the proportions were slightly different, taller on average with broader shoulders and longer limbs relative to their torso. Their skin came in shades that had no human equivalent. A kind of deep, shifting blue-green in some, a pale gray-silver in others, and in some a warm amber-brown that was close enough to certain human tones that it made the differences feel more shocking, not less. Their faces had 2 eyes, a nose structure that was flatter than a human nose, and a mouth. Their eyes were large and dark and entirely black, no white, no iris, just depth. And they were coming out of the ships in enormous numbers. Not soldiers in formation. Not envoys in formal dress. Families. That was the word that kept coming back to Marcus as he watched the footage from a dozen different locations. He saw what appeared to be adults carrying children. He saw elderly individuals being helped by younger ones. He saw clusters of beings sitting in the grass outside their ships, holding each other, some of them with their heads lowered in what looked achingly like exhaustion or grief. They had luggage. Not much, a bag each, sometimes two. Whatever fit in one pair of arms. They were not invaders. They were refugees. The first communication came at 4:30 p.m., and it came not from a government channel or a military radio frequency but through every television broadcast, every radio station, every digital screen and public announcement system simultaneously across the entire planet. The voice was synthesized. They had clearly used humanity's own radio transmissions to construct a working model of human speech, and the result was something that sounded like a voice, but slightly too smooth, the way a recording of a voice sounds different from the real thing in a room. People of Earth, the voice said. The entire planet went quiet in a way that had never happened before and would never happen again. We are the Veth. We are sorry for the manner of our arrival. There was no other option. What you are witnessing is the displacement of 6,200,000 Veth civilians. They have been brought here against their will. We wish to explain. Pause. In that pause, Marcus realized he was holding his coffee cup so hard his knuckles had turned white. Our galaxy is governed by a body known as the Galactic Compact, a council of 41 species. The Veth have been members of this compact for 300 years. 8 months ago, the Veth refused a directive from the Compact's governing council. The directive was unjust. The Veth refused. As punishment for this refusal, the Compact has voted to strip the Veth of their home system. Our primary world, 3 colony worlds and all orbital habitats have been seized. All Veth who remained on these worlds have been forcibly transported. To here. Another pause. Earth was chosen by the Compact Council as the destination because the Compact classifies Earth as a Level 3 world, pre-contact, pre-interstellar, without representation or recourse in galactic law. In the Compact's calculation, depositing 6 million refugees on a Level 3 world was the perfect punishment. You have no voice. You have no power to object. You cannot complain to any authority that the Compact recognizes. The Veth have nowhere else to go. And the Compact expects that you, a primitive, territorial, violent species by their assessment, will make our suffering complete. The voice paused a third time, and when it continued, something changed in its tone, a subtle shift that felt even through the synthesized delivery like an appeal, like a hand extended. We do not know what you will do. We have studied your history. It contains great violence and great cruelty. It also contains something that most compact species do not have a word for. You call it compassion. You have fed strangers and sheltered enemies and sent aid to the far side of your world for people you will never meet. We do not know which version of humanity we are about to encounter. We are 6,200,000 Veth. We have children and elderly and injured among us. We have nothing left. We are, as best we understand your language, at your mercy. The broadcast ended. The world sat in silence for approximately 45 seconds. Then everyone started talking at once. Marcus Webb sat in the conference room of the Columbus FEMA office and listened to the chaos around him and felt something settle in his chest. It was not calm exactly. It was more like clarity. Like a moment when the fog lifts and you can see what the road actually looks like ahead of you. His supervisor Janet was on the phone with Washington. His colleagues were arguing, some afraid, some angry, some fascinated, some all three at once. His own phone had 17 missed calls from his wife, Sarah, and he sent her a quick text. I'm okay. I'll call soon. It's going to be okay, before turning back to the room. He thought about 6 million people sitting in fields. He thought about his daughters drawing on his dashboard. A horse, slightly lopsided, with a large smile because his daughter Lily put smiles on all her drawings including the horses. He raised his voice over the noise in the conference room. Janet, he said. What do we know about the landing sites in Ohio? Janet looked at him over her phone. She was a heavy-set woman in her 50s with reading glasses perpetually pushed up into her steel-gray hair, and she had a talent for cutting through noise that Marcus had always admired. 3 sites, she said. Outside Newark, outside Xenia, and along the Muskingum River south of Zanesville. We're looking at maybe. She checked her tablet. Approximately 200,000 total in those 3 sites. What are their conditions? Marcus asked. Unknown. We have no contact. We have no. Then that's the first thing we need to fix, Marcus said. We need to know if they're cold, if they're injured, if they have food and water. We need a contact protocol. Someone in the room, a younger analyst named Derek Chin, said, shouldn't we be waiting for federal guidance? For military authorization. The federal government is going to be overwhelmed right now, Marcus said. 6 million people just landed all over the world simultaneously. Washington is not going to have a coherent directive in the next 4 hours. But those people in the field outside Newark are sitting in the cold right now, and if any of them are injured or sick, every hour we wait makes it worse. He looked around the room. We're an emergency management agency. This is an emergency. I'd like to start managing it. Janet looked at him for a long moment. Then she took her phone away from her ear. Okay, she said. Let's get to work. That evening, as the sun went down over Columbus, Ohio, Marcus Webb drove out to the field south of Newark where approximately 60,000 Veth had landed. He went in a FEMA vehicle, with Janet beside him and Derek in the back seat, and 3 other cars from their office following behind. They had gotten ahead of the military roadblocks by going through county roads, which was possibly technically inadvisable, and Marcus had decided not to think about that too hard. He pulled up to the edge of the field and stepped out of the car. The ships were enormous up close, much larger than they appeared on television screens. They curved against the darkening sky like sleeping whales. The Veth had come out of the ships and were gathered in clusters across the field. Some had lit something that gave off a soft, steady amber glow. In that light, Marcus could see faces, the large dark eyes, the flattened noses, the expressions that were different from human expressions but not entirely alien. He could read something in them. He had no framework for Veth cultural signals, but something in him, some ancient mammalian emotional recognition system, looked at those faces and read exhaustion and fear and grief. He started walking toward them. Marcus, Derek said very quietly from behind him. Are you sure? No, Marcus said. But I'm doing it anyway. He walked toward the nearest cluster of Veth. They saw him coming and some of them stood. He noticed several of them move to stand between him and what appeared to be children, a protective instinct so universal that it hit him right in the chest. He stopped about 10 feet away. He held up both hands, empty, palms out. One of the Veth, taller than the others, with a blue-green skin coloring and a pattern of darker markings along the jawline, stepped forward. They regarded each other. Marcus Webb was not a diplomat. He had not taken courses in first contact protocols. He had not prepared a speech. He was a logistics coordinator from Ohio who had driven out here because 60,000 people were sitting in a field in the cold and someone needed to check on them. He said, "My name is Marcus. I work for an emergency management agency. I'm here to find out if anyone is hurt and if anyone needs help." The Veth in front of him was silent for a moment. Then, and the sound was startling in its clarity, it spoke. In English. Accented strangely, the vowels a slightly different shape, but entirely intelligible. "You are not military," the Veth said. "No," Marcus said. "You came without weapons." "Yes." "You came to ask if we are hurt." "Yes." Another silence. The Veth's large dark eyes moved over Marcus's face with an expression he couldn't read. Then the Veth said something to the others, something in a language that sounded like water moving over stones, and the tension in the group shifted. Not vanished, but shifted. The Veth turned back to Marcus. "We have 17 who are injured from the transport," the Veth said. 3 are children. 2 of our elderly did not survive the transport. And we have. The Veth paused, searching for the word, 4,200 who have not eaten in 31 hours. Marcus turned to Derek. "Get on the radio," he said. "I want every food bank in a 50-mile radius on the phone. I want the Red Cross. I want the Ohio National Guard field kitchen units. I want ambulances. And I want someone to find out what these people can actually eat, because we need to be careful about biochemical compatibility before we feed anyone anything." He turned back to the Veth. "What is your name?" he asked. The Veth made a sound that Marcus's ear couldn't quite catch. Then the Veth said, "In your language, the closest is Saren." "Saren," Marcus said. "I'm going to do everything I can to help. I can't promise I'll get everything right. I don't know enough about your people yet. But I'd like you to tell me what you need and I will listen and I will try." Saren looked at him for a long, quiet moment. "That is more," Saren said slowly, "than we expected." By the end of the first week, 3 things were clear. The first was that the Veth were not going to be leaving. The Compact had made that abundantly clear in a second transmission, this one directed not at humanity but intercepted by Earth's increasingly frantic array of newly active radio astronomers. The transmission was to the Veth themselves, a cold, bureaucratic notification that their resettlement on Earth was permanent. The Compact had transferred legal title of the Veth's home system and colonies to another member species. The Veth's ships had been remotely disabled. They were here. Full stop. The second thing that became clear was that humanity's reaction was, as the Veth's own initial address had anticipated, complicated. There were protests. large ones in cities across the world. Some were fearful, people who understood only that 6 million alien beings had arrived uninvited on their planet and saw threat where there was only tragedy. Some were angry in uglier ways, the kind of anger that has always greeted the displaced and the foreign and the desperate regardless of species. In several countries, governments had already begun talking about containment zones and forced settlements and security protocols that sounded less like emergency management and more like imprisonment. But there was something else happening too. In the field outside Newark, Ohio, a woman named Carol Briggs who ran a regional food bank had shown up on the second morning with 7 trucks full of supplies and a team of 20 volunteers. She had not waited for government authorization. She had simply seen the footage on the news, gotten on the phone with her network and driven out. In a coastal town in Portugal, local fishermen had organized their boats to bring Veth who had landed on a nearby island to the mainland, running trips back and forth all through the night. No one had asked them to. They had just done it. In South Korea, a hospital administrator named Ji-won Park had called an emergency meeting of her entire medical staff and started a crash course on Veth biology, working from the detailed biological briefings that Veth doctors were providing through translators, and began adapting her facilities to treat Veth injuries. Her hospital was at 200% capacity within 4 days, and she had 40 doctors sleeping in break rooms and storage closets, and she never once considered stopping. And in the United States Capitol, a senator from Ohio named Eleanor Hughes stood up in an emergency session of Congress and said something that would be replayed for decades. 1939, she said. The Mississippi St. Louis. 907 Jewish refugees, fleeing Nazi Germany, trying to land in Cuba and then in the United States and then in Canada. All 3 countries turned them away. They went back to Europe. A quarter of them died in the Holocaust. We had a chance to choose compassion and we chose cruelty and people died because we did. That choice has followed us in history ever since. We are being given another choice right now and it is the same choice in larger numbers. How we respond will define not just who we are, but who we have always been and who we will become. I am asking this Congress to remember the St. Louis. I am asking us this time to make the other choice. The speech went viral in approximately 90 minutes. The third thing that became clear in the first week was that Marcus Webb was extremely good at his job. The Columbus FEMA office had been unofficially designated as the Northeast Ohio Veth Coordination Hub, which was not an official designation in any government documentation but which had emerged organically because Marcus had made himself indispensable to every agency and organization working in the 3 Ohio landing sites, and Janet Bloom had simply let him run with it because he was getting results. He had established a working relationship with Saren, who turned out to be something like a community leader, not a political official in the formal Veth sense, but someone the community trusted, a person others deferred to when decisions needed making. Over the first days as the basic crises of food and medical care were being navigated, Marcus and Saren spent hours in conversation, building a shared vocabulary that went beyond words to encompass context. He learned that Veth society was organized around what Saren translated as hearth networks, extended family groups that functioned as both economic and emotional support systems. The 60,000 Veth in the Newark field were from 11 different hearth networks, and they had not all been on the same world before the expulsion. The compact had mixed them together during transport, apparently to maximize the disruption. He learned that Veth ate 3 times daily but their nutritional requirements were substantially different from humans, high in specific amino acids that were common in Earth's ocean life but less so in land plants, which meant that fish and shellfish were going to be important staples but that most grains and vegetables would need to be supplemented. The FEMA office had gotten this information on day 2 and had quietly started working the fishing industry contacts. He learned that Veth children under the equivalent of age 8 experienced severe trauma responses from sudden environmental change, not unlike human children but more extreme and harder to mitigate. There were approximately 12,000 children in the 3 Ohio sites under this age threshold. Marcus had gotten in touch with every school counselor and child psychologist in a 100-mile radius and started organizing a support team. He learned, slowly and through patient conversation, what the Veth had refused to do, the directive from the compact that had led to this punishment. The directive had been simple. The compact, which governed not just trade and diplomacy but certain ethical standards across its member species, had issued an order requiring the Veth to participate in a planetary extraction operation on a pre-contact world, an uninhabited planet rich in rare minerals needed by several compact species. The extraction would have been clean from a mechanical standpoint. But the planet had life on it. Not intelligent life by the compact's definition, complex biospheres, animal ecosystems, a world still several hundred million years from producing anything that could build a radio transmitter. But life? The Veth had said no. Their word for what they believed, Saren explained to Marcus, translated approximately as, the web, the idea that all living things were connected, that a complex biosphere was itself a form of intelligence in the aggregate, that to strip mine a living world was a kind of murder even if no individual being on it could speak in its own defense. The Compact had disagreed. The Compact had decided that a species that refused productive work over sentimental attachment to non-sapient organisms was a liability and an embarrassment. The Compact had punished them. Marcus listened to all of this over a sequence of evenings, sitting in folding chairs at the edge of the Newark field as the stars came out, stars that now seemed different to him, fuller, more crowded with possibility and menace both. You refuse to hurt a living world, he said on the fourth evening. Yes, Saren said. And they sent you here to be punished. To a planet full of living things. Saren's expression shifted, that readable but foreign shift that Marcus was slowly learning to interpret. They expected you to complete our punishment, Saren said. They expected hostility. Violence. They considered Earth an adequate engine of suffering. They don't know us very well, Marcus said. No, Saren said. It appears they do not. Marcus looked out at the field where lights were burning now, a mix of Veth amber glows and human electric lanterns, and the cooking station that Carol Briggs's team had set up, and the medical tent where a rotating team of nurses and Veth healers were working together on the injured. He could hear, very faintly, what he thought might be a Veth child crying and an adult voice saying something low and steady, the cadence of comfort that needed no translation. 6 million people, he said. We have 7 billion. We have room. It is not only room, Saren said carefully. It is, I have watched your species for 1 week. You disagree among yourselves. Some of your people want us gone. Some want us in what they call containment. Your governments have not yet decided. Our governments have not yet decided, Marcus agreed. But the governments aren't the only thing we are. What did you see this week? Not just the politics. What did you actually see? Saren was quiet for a moment. I saw a woman named Carol who came without being asked, Saren said. I saw young humans who translated our medical information without hesitation for 3 days with no sleep. I saw an old human farmer south of here who opened his barn and brought blankets and did not speak our language and did not need to. Pause. I saw a child. A human child, perhaps 6 of your years. She brought a drawing she had made of a Veth, our shape, our coloring, approximately correct, and she had written on it, in your letters, the word, welcome. Marcus said nothing. I did not expect this, Saren said quietly. My people did not expect this. We expected what the Compact expected. We have been studying your species for decades, as have the Compact. We saw your wars. We saw your treatment of your own refugees. We knew the odds were not good. And yet, Saren's dark eyes moved to Marcus's face. And yet here you sit in the cold talking to me. Here I sit, Marcus agreed. Why? Saren asked. And it was a genuine question, not a rhetorical one. You have nothing to gain from this. I understand enough of your culture to know that. You are not a politician building a record. You are not wealthy. You are not doing this for, Saren searched for the phrase, for public relations. Why do you come every day? Marcus thought about it for a real moment, giving the question the respect it deserved. Because 6 million people sat in a field, he said. And it seemed wrong not to come. Saren was quiet for a long time after that. In Washington, the emergency legislation was moving in ways that would have been impossible in ordinary times. The sheer scale and visibility of the situation had compressed political timelines enormously. Senator Eleanor Hughes's speech had hit a nerve. The St. Louis comparison had spread. The images from the landing sites, the families, the children, the elderly being helped out of ships, were playing on every screen, and while the fearful protests were real and loud, something else was building. It was building at the individual level, which is where these things always start. A teacher in Minnesota who started an online database matching Veth families with volunteer host families. A veterinarian in Texas who had experience with non-standard animal biology and had started a volunteer medical consulting network sharing what was being learned about Veth anatomy. A restaurant owner in Los Angeles who had worked out, through patient trial and error with a Veth biochemist, the first earth-sourced recipe that was both nutritious for Veth and, incidentally, quite good, a seafood-based stew that became known in the press as the Solidarity Bowl, and which was on the menu of hundreds of restaurants within 3 weeks. It was building at the organizational level, too. The Red Cross deployed an emergency international response equivalent to its largest natural disaster operations. The UN High Commissioner for Refugees, an organization that had existed to manage exactly this kind of displacement, if never at quite this scale, moved with impressive speed given the unprecedented nature of the situation. Several major NGOs that had been working in human refugee contexts retooled their existing infrastructure and experience toward the VETH situation. And it was building politically if more slowly. Senator Hughes's bill, the VETH Emergency Humanitarian Relief Act, quickly nicknamed VERA, passed its first committee vote 17 days after landing. It was not perfect legislation. It was not generous legislation, not in the way that later laws would be. But it was a beginning. It allocated emergency housing funds, established a VETH liaison office, and most critically, it prohibited the use of military force against VETH civilians unless in response to direct and documented violence. That last provision mattered more than any other. Marcus learned about the bill's passage when Janet called him on his cell phone at 7:30 in the morning while he was driving out to the Newark site. He pulled over on the county road and sat for a moment after she told him. He thought about the 17 injured who had become 12. 5 of the most severe cases had been transported to Columbus Medical Center, where a team of doctors and VETH healers had spent a week figuring out how to treat them, and had succeeded. He thought about the 2 elderly VETH who had not survived the transport. Saren had told him their names and he had written them down in his notebook, Thiva and Karel. He thought about the 4,200 who had not eaten in 31 hours, who had now eaten 31 meals. He thought about Lily's latest drawing, which she had done specifically for Saren's community, a whole crowd of VETH, each one different, each one with one of Lily's characteristic large smiles, and at the bottom in her careful 7-year-old handwriting, "You are welcome here." He had delivered it himself. He put the car back in drive and kept going. 7 weeks after landing day, a third transmission came from the Galactic Compact. This one was directed specifically at Earth's governments. The first communication the Compact had made that acknowledged humanity as a party worth addressing directly. The transmission was intercepted first by a radio telescope in New Mexico. It was decoded using the same linguistic framework that the VETH's own initial broadcast had established, and the decoded text was distributed to every major government on Earth within hours. The message was not an apology. It was not an offer of dialogue. It was an assessment. To the inhabitants of the world designated Sol 3, the Compact observes with interest that you have not yet begun systematic hostile action against the VETH population. This is unexpected. The Compact offers the following clarification of your situation. The VETH are your permanent responsibility. The Compact will provide no assistance. The VETH's former assets have been redistributed. The VETH have no legal status within the Compact. Any VETH who were present on Compact worlds at time of enforcement action have been expelled to join the population on Sol 3. The Compact further notes that Sol 3 is classified as a non-member world. Sol 3 has no rights under Compact treaty law. The Compact does not regard any request from Sol 3 as having legal standing. Sol 3 is advised that Compact observation of this situation will continue. This message is provided as a courtesy. The final line read, "The Compact expects this situation to resolve itself through natural mechanisms within 18 of Sol 3's months." That last line became the most discussed phrase on Earth for the next 6 weeks. Natural mechanisms. The Compact had deposited 6 million beings on a pre-contact world with no infrastructure support and expected that something they called natural mechanisms would resolve the situation. They expected humanity to be the mechanism. The interpretation of this phrase, once it circulated publicly, which it did within 12 hours of the transmission's distribution, produced a reaction that no one, least of all the Compact, had anticipated. It made people furious. Not afraid. Not uncertain. Furious. The anger manifested in different ways. In the United States, the VERA had been stalled in a Senate subcommittee for 2 weeks, tangled in debates about funding and security protocols. Within 48 hours of the natural mechanism's transmission, it was unstalled. The particular political alchemy of being told what you were expected to do, especially by an entity that viewed itself as superior and viewed you as inconsequential, had a galvanizing effect on the legislative process that no amount of impassioned speeches had achieved. The bill passed the Senate 71 to 29. It passed the House by a larger margin. In France, the government that had been waffling on the question of VETH settlement rights abruptly declared a national policy of dignified welcome and began converting a network of former military bases into VETH residential communities. In India, where several 100,000 VETH had landed in the Thar Desert, a national volunteer effort that had been organized by a network of NGOs suddenly found itself with a government budget, government logistics support, and a decree from the Prime Minister's office that described the Veth situation as the test of our civilization's character. In Japan, where the cultural context was different and the initial response had been more cautious, the transmission had a different but equally powerful effect. The phrase, natural mechanisms, was widely interpreted correctly as an expectation that humans would be violent and cruel, and the Japanese cultural concept of demonstrating excellence precisely because someone doubted your ability made this interpretation into a form of challenge. The response was massive, organized, and effective. In many places across Africa, where the experience of colonial displacement was not abstract history but living memory embedded in grandparents' stories and legal systems and land patterns, the Compact's treatment of the Veth was recognized with an immediacy and a moral clarity that cut through political debate. Community organizations in Nigeria, Kenya, Ethiopia, Ghana, and dozens of other countries mobilized with a speed and a commitment that left the international aid organizations scrambling to keep up with what was already being done at the grassroots level before any official framework existed. Not everywhere. It was not a perfect or universal response. In several countries, the governments chose containment. In a few places, there were incidents, confrontations, some violent, between human populations and newly landed Veth. One of these, in a coastal region of one country, resulted in deaths on both sides and became a crisis that consumed international attention for weeks. But on balance, and the balance was not close, humanity looked at the Compact's expectation that natural mechanisms would reduce the Veth population and chose, loudly and visibly and in great numbers, to do the opposite. Marcus Webb, in the meantime, was dealing with a problem that was almost entirely unglamorous and yet was arguably the most important thing happening. The problem was bureaucracy. 6 million people needed, as it turned out, not just food and water and medicine but the entire infrastructure of ordinary life. They needed housing that fit their physiological needs. Veth were comfortable at slightly higher temperatures than most humans, needed sleeping platforms at different heights than human beds, and found the particular frequency of human standard fluorescent lighting actively painful. They needed ongoing access to a nutritionally adequate diet, which meant supply chains, which meant agricultural partnerships, which meant import permits for certain ocean fish species that were not commonly harvested in the specific quantities needed. They needed healthcare that bridged two completely different biological systems. They needed education for their children. They needed some form of legal status that allowed them to participate in economic life. They needed communication infrastructure. Their language and writing system were entirely unlike any human system, which meant interpreters, which meant interpreter training, which meant time. They needed, in short, everything. And it all had to be built from nothing. Marcus spent the second month of the Veth presence driving between 3 landing sites and a growing network of offices and temporary housing facilities, troubleshooting the 10,000 small failures that occurred when an unprecedented situation was being managed by an improvised combination of federal agencies, NGOs, local governments, volunteer organizations, and private companies who had never worked together before and had no shared protocol. He became extraordinarily good at identifying the single point of failure in a failing system. He had always been good at logistics, at seeing how things connected and where the weak links were. Now he was doing it at a scale and in a context that tested every skill he had. He also spent time with Saren. Regular time at the end of each long day, or sometimes in the morning before the day's chaos began. These conversations had shifted from the necessary pragmatics of the first days, what do your people need, how can we provide it, to something more complex. They were learning each other. Saren was, Marcus gradually understood, what the Veth called a memory keeper. Someone whose role in the community was to remember and transmit history. Not a historian in the academic sense but something closer to what you might call a cultural elder, the person who held the stories of who the community was and where it came from. On their own worlds, this would have been a role with specific physical spaces, ritual contexts, particular objects and locations that were meaningful. All of that was gone now. What Saren had left was the stories themselves. And Saren told them, slowly in those evening and morning conversations, stories of the Veth's home world, which had a name that translated roughly as the warm world, a world with 3 moons and a dense, humid atmosphere and forests of something like fungal growths that glowed softly at night, and oceans that were shallower than Earth's oceans but much warmer and full of complex life. Stories of the colony worlds. Stories of the 300 years of Compact membership and what it had meant, the cultural exchanges and the trade and the diplomatic achievements and also the compromises and the costs and the accumulated small erosions of what made the Veth themselves. Marcus listened. He took notes when Saren allowed it. He started to understand that what had happened to the Veth was not just a logistical crisis but a cultural wound of extraordinary depth, and that helping the Veth was not just about feeding and housing 6 million people but about creating conditions in which 6 million people could continue to be themselves. This was harder and less measurable and in some ways more important. He also started to understand the Compact. Not from the Compact itself, which communicated nothing to Earth beyond that initial message, but from the Veth, who had been members of the Compact for 3 centuries and knew it from the inside. The Compact was, by any reasonable assessment, an extraordinary institution. It had maintained relative peace among 41 species across thousands of light years for over 1,000 years. It had standards of technology transfer and resource sharing that had lifted multiple species out of resource scarcity. It had a legal system that, within the community of its members, was sophisticated and largely fair. Its fatal flaw was the one that all empires and institutions tend toward: the belief that the categories it used to understand the world were the world. The Compact divided the galaxy into member species and non-member species, sapient beings and non-sapient beings, advanced civilizations and primitive ones. And within these categories it made decisions that felt, to the Compact's governing council, entirely logical and proportionate. Depositing 6 million refugees on Earth was, in the Compact's framework, a reasonable punishment. Earth was not a member world. Its inhabitants were not recognized as fully sapient under Compact law. The bar for sapience in the Compact's classification involved faster-than-light travel capability, which Earth lacked. Therefore, Earth was essentially a wilderness area. Depositing inconvenient populations in wilderness areas was a thing that could be done. That this wilderness area was inhabited by 7 billion beings with complex civilizations and rich inner lives and children who drew pictures and whispered comfort to each other in the dark. This was, in the Compact's framework, essentially irrelevant. They were irrelevant. They did not count. They look at you, Saren said one evening, and they see what they expect to see. A young species. Violent. Tribal. Not yet ready. They have a template and they apply it and they do not look more carefully than the template requires. And the template is wrong, Marcus said. The template is incomplete, Saren said carefully. Your species does have violence. It does have tribalism. The template is not fabricated from nothing. But it captures only a portion of what you are. The Compact does not know about, and here Saren paused looking for the word, the woman with the trucks, the farmer with the blankets, the child with the drawing. The Compact doesn't know about those things because those things aren't loud, Marcus said. Yes, Saren said. The quiet acts. The ones done without announcement. These do not appear in the signals that travel across interstellar distances. Violence travels. Cruelty travels. These things are loud. But the other things, Saren's dark eyes moved to the field, where a group of Veth children were doing something that looked like a game, running in patterns, laughing in that high, almost chiming sound that Marcus had come to recognize as Veth laughter. They do not broadcast themselves. Marcus looked at the children. They will, he said. They will now. The autumn came to Ohio and the Veth felt it deeply. Their home world, the warm world, had not had seasons in the way Earth had them. It had wet periods and dry periods, but the temperature had been relatively stable year-round, warmed by its star and its thick atmosphere. The cooling of an Ohio October, the wind shifting, the trees turning, the mornings arriving with a bite, was an experience for which the Veth had no framework. Marcus watched them discover it. He was at the Newark site on a specific morning in mid-October when the temperature dropped sharply overnight and the field was covered in frost for the first time. He arrived early before the day's work began, and found Saren standing at the edge of the community area, looking out at the white-touched grass. This is frost, Marcus said, coming to stand beside Saren. We have seen it in your media, Saren said. But to be in it, Saren crouched down and pressed fingers to a frosted blade of grass. It is cold. It will get colder, Marcus said. This is only October. By December and January it will be much colder. Saren was quiet for a moment. The children are afraid of the cold. They have not experienced it before. Children are usually afraid of things they haven't experienced, Marcus said. And then they discover snow and they love it. Saren looked at him. Snow is frozen water that falls from the sky in small flakes, Marcus said. When it accumulates on the ground, children make structures out of it and throw it at each other and slide down hills in it. He paused trying to find the words. It's difficult to explain why snow makes people happy. It just does. Saren absorbed this information with the focused, careful attention that Marcus had come to associate with the Veth way of receiving new information. Not just listening but storing. I will tell the children, Saren said. The temporary housing structures that had been erected in the Newark site were better than tents but not yet adequate for a deep Ohio winter, and this had been on Marcus's list for weeks. The federal funding that Vera had authorized was moving, but government money moves at government speed, and winter was arriving at winter speed. He had been working a parallel track: private partnerships, donated materials, volunteer labor. His breakthrough on this front had come from an unexpected direction: the construction industry. A developer named Frank Kowalski, who had built subdivisions across the Midwest for 30 years, had called the FEMA coordination hub 3 weeks into the crisis. He wasn't calling to offer help exactly, he was calling because he was curious. He had spent his career understanding what people needed in a living space, and he had questions about what the VETH needed. Marcus had spent 3 hours on the phone with him. Frank had specifications that Marcus couldn't provide: VETH sleeping platform heights, preferred ceiling heights, temperature requirements, the light frequency issue, door width needs for a species that was on average 8 inches taller than humans. Marcus connected Frank directly with Saren and with a VETH architect named Vel who had been, on the Warm World, involved in urban design. The conversation between Frank and Vel, conducted through an interpreter, was the beginning of something neither of them had expected. Frank was a practical man with deep expertise and no pretensions about what he was good at and what he wasn't. Vel was an architect who had lost every building she had ever designed when the Warm World was seized, and who was carrying that loss like a physical weight. In their conversation, both of them found something they needed. Frank found a technical problem complex enough to fully engage him, and Vel found a project. Within 3 weeks, they had designed what they called, informally, the Warm Structure, a modular housing unit built from standard American materials but sized and configured to VETH specifications, with an internal temperature management system, modified lighting, and ceilings at a height that didn't make the average VETH feel cramped. The design used as much donated material as possible and was built to be assembled by mixed teams of volunteers and VETH community members. The first warm structures went up in the Newark site in the 3rd week of October, and Marcus was there when the first family moved in, a VETH couple with 4 children and an elderly woman who appeared to be the grandmother. He watched them walk through the door and look around at the space, and watched the grandmother put her hand on the wall and watched her face. He did not know what she said to the others. He did not have a translator present. But he recognized the expression. It was the expression of someone who has been without safety for a long time, recognizing it again. Saren came to Marcus 2 weeks later with a request that surprised him. "The children need school," Saren said. Marcus had been expecting this and had it on his list, but the logistics were daunting. The VETH educational approach was fundamentally different from the human model. It was less classroom-based and more apprenticeship and community-embedded. VETH children of different ages learned together, with older children teaching younger ones under the guidance of adults, and the separation by age group that characterized human schooling didn't match the VETH model. More practically, VETH children needed to learn English if they were going to live in the United States, but their parents needed English too, and the VETH language needed to be preserved and maintained, and the trauma the children had experienced needed to be addressed as part of the educational environment, not separate from it. Marcus went to the Columbus school system. He went to the local university's education department. He went to several child psychologists who had been working with the medical team. He assembled a meeting. What came out of that meeting was not a school. It was something called, eventually, a community learning center. A converted warehouse near the Newark site that became a gathering space for VETH children and families and a rotating team of human educators and volunteers. English was taught in immersive, play-based formats. VETH children taught each other and taught curious human children who came on weekend visits organized through a local interfaith coalition. A retired music teacher named Dorothy Hayes began teaching human music and was, in turn, taught VETH music, a complex, layered vocal form that she described as something between choral singing and what I imagine the Northern Lights would sound like if you could hear them. Dorothy Hayes was 73 years old and she attended the community center 6 days a week, and she cried, in a very contained and dignified way, the first time a group of VETH children learned to sing, "You Are My Sunshine," in English. Marcus heard about this from Saren, who told the story with something in their expression that he was beginning to recognize as VETH humor, a particular quality of warmth around the eyes, a slight curve at the corner of the mouth. "They sang it 17 times, Saren said. "Dorothy does love that song," Marcus said. "She taught them," Saren said. "And then they asked her to teach them more. They wanted, specifically," Saren paused, "a song about horses. Because one of your children who visited told them that horses are the best animal, and now they are very interested in horses." Marcus thought about the drawing on his dashboard. "I know someone who might be able to help with that," he said. He brought Lily. It was a Sunday in early November and he was not officially working, and he had been meaning to bring Lily for weeks. She was 7 years old and she had been asking daily since landing day, and he had been putting it off because he wasn't sure what she would see or how she would react, and because protecting her from difficult things was a reflex he had to consciously override. He talked to her about it first the way he always talked to her, honestly, without false reassurance. He told her that the Veth were people who had lost their home and were living in temporary places. He told her some of them were sad. He told her some of them looked different from humans. He told her they spoke a different language but were learning English. Lily had listened with the focused attention she applied to things that interested her, and then she had said, "Will they want to see my horse drawings?" "I think so," Marcus said. She brought a folder full of drawings. Horse drawings, yes, but also drawings of other things. Houses and trees and what was clearly a Veth as imagined by a 7-year-old, blue-green and large-eyed and naturally smiling. At the community center, Saren introduced them to a group of Veth children approximately Lily's age. There was a careful moment of mutual inspection. 7-year-old Lily Webb and 6 Veth children regarding each other across the small gap of species difference, which is both enormous and in children much smaller than in adults. Then one of the Veth children pointed at Lily's folder. Lily opened it. Within 20 minutes, the whole group was on the floor of the community center, Lily's drawings spread out between them, and one of the Veth children, a small girl child with silver-gray skin and very large eyes, had produced something from her bag that was clearly a Veth drawing tool, something like a stylus, and was drawing alongside Lily in a form of artistic conversation that required no translator. Marcus stood with Saren and watched. "She was the one who didn't want to come out of the ship on landing day," Saren said quietly. "She sat by the door for 4 hours and would not come out." Marcus looked at the child, who was now showing Lily something about how to hold the stylus, and at Lily, who was demonstrating something about shading with a colored pencil, and at the space between them where something simple and necessary was happening. "What changed her mind?" he asked. "Coming out of the ship." "Another child," Saren said. "A human child. A boy." He was standing outside and he waved at her through the ship door. Saren made the gesture, a simple back and forth, waved. "That is all." She came out. Marcus was quiet for a moment. "We keep underestimating children," he said. "Yes," Saren agreed. "Both of our species do." By the 6-month mark, the situation had developed a rhythm. Not a solution, it was far too early and far too complex for anything that could be called solved. But a rhythm. The acute emergency was over. The Veth were no longer sitting in fields. They were no longer going hungry or untreated, or unhoused in any systematic sense. The most urgent crises of the first weeks had been addressed, imperfectly but adequately. And now the longer, slower, more difficult work had begun. The work of integration. Not assimilation. The Veth were not being asked to stop being Veth. But integration, the process by which two communities learn to share space and resources and eventually to see each other as neighbors. It was going better in some places than others. In Ohio, Marcus could say with confidence that it was going reasonably well. The community center had expanded. The warm structures had been built across all 3 sites and were now being extended into permanent housing in a collaboration between the state government and the Veth community. Veth adults were beginning to participate in the Ohio economy. A handful of Veth engineers, working with human counterparts, had started a materials technology consulting practice that was generating attention from major manufacturers. A Veth chef, working with human food scientists to make earth ingredients work within Veth nutritional requirements, had opened what was, pending the resolution of some complex legal questions about the validity of business licenses for non-human species, operating as an informal community restaurant that had a 3-week wait list of humans wanting to eat there. The legal questions were one of Marcus's ongoing headaches. American law had not anticipated the existence of non-human persons, and the Veth existed in a peculiar legal limbo. Vera had established their right to be present, to receive emergency services, and to be protected from violence, but it had not established their right to own property, enter contracts, receive standard identification documents, access the banking system, or pursue legal claims. These gaps were being addressed through a combination of emergency regulations and test cases moving through the courts, but they were addressed imperfectly and inconsistently. Marcus had started working with a lawyer named Rachel Kim, who was 32 years old and had recently made partner at a Columbus firm and who had, in her words, dropped every single other case I had, the week after landing day to work on Veth legal rights. Rachel was tireless and precise and had a talent for finding the exact provision in existing law that could be stretched to cover a situation the law had never imagined. She was also, Marcus had noticed, spending more and more time at the Newark site and having long conversations with Vel the architect that seemed to have moved beyond the professional. He mentioned this to Sarah one evening and Sarah laughed and said, "Marcus, you are the last person to notice these things," which was probably fair. The emotional work was harder than the logistical work. The Veth were grieving. All of them, in different ways and at different stages, but all of them. They had lost their worlds, not just their homes but the physical places that anchored their memories and their identity. Saren had a word for it in the Veth language that translated approximately as the loss of ground. A grief specific to the severing from a place that was more than location, that was the soil in which a self was rooted. Marcus encountered this grief regularly now in different forms. He encountered it in Saren's face when talking about the warm world's triple moon nights. He encountered it in Vel's sudden silence one afternoon when a human showed her a photograph of an old-growth forest, because the image reminded her of the glowing fungal forests of her home. He encountered it most acutely when he met a Veth elder named Aros. Aros was approximately 90 years old in Veth terms, which the medical team had determined was equivalent to somewhere between 65 and 70 in human biological age. Aros had been a scientist on the warm world, a kind of biologist-philosopher, someone who studied the web of life that the Veth believed was itself a form of intelligence. Aros had spent 50 years studying a specific ecosystem on the warm world's northern continent, a high-altitude region where the air was thin and the fungal growth forms were particularly ancient. That region's ecology was as well documented in Aros's work as anything on Earth. Thousands of species, their relationships, the slow changes across decades of careful observation. All of that was gone. The warm world was being strip-mined by the species the Compact had given it to. The ecosystem Aros had spent 50 years studying was being destroyed. Aros sat in the community center most days, quiet, sometimes drawing detailed, scientifically precise drawings of species that no longer existed anywhere that Aros could go. Marcus had been introduced to Aros early on and had visited several times, communicating through an interpreter. He had brought, eventually, a professor from Ohio State's biology department named Dr. Patricia Walsh, who worked in ecosystem science. Patricia and Aros had spent 6 hours together in that first meeting. The interpreter had worked so hard that he'd had to take a break. Patricia had come to Marcus afterward looking like she'd been through something. "That information," Patricia said. "The documentation he has, just in his head, the things he knows, Marcus, an ecosystem that no one else ever studied, that no one else even knew about. And it's gone now. The physical place is being stripped. But he still knows it. So it's not entirely gone," Marcus said. Patricia had looked at him with an expression he couldn't immediately read. "I want to do something," she said. "I want to document it. Work with him, systematically, to get everything he knows recorded. Because it's the last record that will ever exist of that ecosystem. It's like finding someone who knew a library, every single book in it, and the library burned down. You'd record everything they could remember." "Do it," Marcus said. "I'll need funding." "I'll find funding," Marcus said. "You found it?" Ohio State provided some, a private environmental foundation provided more, and a crowdfunding campaign, launched on a Tuesday funded in 12 hours, covered the rest. Aros and Patricia Walsh began what would become a multi-year project. They called it, in English, the Memory Garden, a comprehensive scientific record of the warm world's destroyed ecosystems, built from Aros's 50 years of knowledge and the knowledge of other Veth scientists who joined the effort. It was an act of preservation that existed entirely in human databases now, the only place left in the galaxy where those ecosystems lived. Marcus visited the Memory Garden project once a month. He would sit with Aros for an hour, through an interpreter, while Aros described something. A species' behavior, a seasonal pattern, an interaction between two organisms that no camera had ever recorded because no one from Earth had ever seen the warm world. He listened to things he mostly couldn't fully understand. He thought it was the least he could do. "I need to tell you something," Saren said, one evening in December when the snow had finally arrived and the Veth children had done exactly what Marcus had predicted, discovered that they loved it. They were standing at the edge of the housing area watching children play in the accumulating white. The adult Veth were more cautious about the cold, wearing the heavy coats that had been provided and looking at the snow with the careful attention of people encountering something genuinely strange, but the children had simply embraced it with the wholehearted acceptance of children everywhere. "Tell me," Marcus said. "The Compact is watching more closely than they indicated," Saren said. "We have," a pause, "we have ways of knowing some of what the Compact observes. Through old connections. through members of other species who disagree with the Council's decisions and maintain quiet contacts. We have information that the Compact did not anticipate what is happening here. What exactly did they not anticipate? Marcus asked. This, Saren said, gesturing at the scene before them, the children, the housing, the lights in the community center. Within 18 of your months, by their calculation, there should be significant conflict. Veth and human violence. Government crackdowns. Perhaps mass casualties. Instead, Saren's gesture broadened, taking in the entirety of what the last 6 months had built. Instead, we're building community learning centers and trying to navigate business licensing law, Marcus said. Yes, Saren said. The Compact is, Saren searched for the word. Confused is the nearest translation. The mathematical models they used to predict your response were based on your history of treating outsiders. They used your treatment of human refugees, your colonial history, your warfare. The models predicted hostility with high probability. The models missed something, Marcus said. Several things, Saren said. They missed the variable I do not have a Veth word for. The thing you called compassion in our first speech. But also, Saren paused, and the expression on Saren's face was something Marcus had learned to read as significance, the Veth equivalent of taking a breath before saying something important. They missed anger. Anger? Marcus said. You are angry at them, Saren said. The Compact. The statement about natural mechanisms. I have watched your media. I have listened to your political speeches. Beneath everything else that is happening, the kindness, the logistics, the building, there is also anger. At being used. At the arrogance of being told what you would do. Humans, I have observed, often do their best work when they are angry at something they consider unjust. Marcus thought about this. It was true. He had felt it himself from the beginning, a bone-deep indignation at the Compact's casual disposal of 6 million beings onto a world they regarded as a dumping ground. A fury, under the busyness and the problem-solving, at the arrogance of an entity that had looked at Earth and seen nothing of consequence. So we're proving them wrong, he said. Out of compassion and out of spite. Is that strange? Saren asked. No, Marcus said. That's very human. The 8-month mark brought something none of them had expected. Attention. Not from the Compact. From other species. The galaxy, it turned out, was larger than the Compact. The Compact's 41-member species were not the entirety of sapient life in the universe. They were simply the most organized and loudest faction within a much larger and more varied community. And within that community, what was happening on Earth had started to spread. The Veth had their own communication channels. A network that the Compact had attempted to shut down but had not entirely succeeded in closing, partly because the Veth were, after 3 centuries of Compact membership, highly sophisticated about information security. Through these channels, news of what was happening on Earth had been flowing outward. The food drives, the medical collaborations, the community centers, the memory garden project, the warm structures, the children in the snow. And through other channels, species that had no love for the Compact's governing council, species that watched Compact actions with careful neutrality, species that were themselves too small or isolated to be Compact members, news of Earth was being received and discussed. Marcus learned about this in a somewhat dramatic way. He was in the coordination hub, working late on a Thursday night, when his secure phone rang. The caller was someone from the State Department, a deputy assistant secretary whose name he didn't recognize, and the conversation was unusual enough that he wrote down every word after it ended. The State Department official told him that they had received a communication through what the official described as a non-standard channel. Not the Compact's broadcast system, but something different, narrower, more targeted. The communication was from a species called the Earthy. The official told him the Earthy were non-Compact. They had a complicated history with the Compact and they watched Compact activities closely. The communication had been directed at Earth's governments and had been, the official said, cautiously positive. What did they say? Marcus asked. They said they had been observing the situation for several months, the official said. They said, I'm reading from the transcript here, that Earth's response to the Veth displacement was anomalous relative to Compact predicted outcomes and that they were interested in direct communication. They're essentially saying they want to talk to us. Marcus was quiet for a moment. To us, he said. Earth. A pre-contact, level 3 world with no representation in interstellar bodies. Apparently they don't use the Compact's classification system, the official said. Well, Marcus said. I suppose we should talk to them. The Earthy communication was the first crack in what would eventually become a significant geopolitical shift, but that shift was still months away, and Marcus was more immediately focused on a crisis that had developed within the Ohio communities and that required his full attention. It started with an incident in the Newark site. A human teenager, 16 years old, from a family in the area that had been openly hostile to the Veth presence since day one, threw a rock through the window of one of the warm structures. The family inside, a Veth couple with 3 children, was not injured. The rock hit an empty chair. The teenager was caught, identified, and turned over to local police. What happened next was the crisis. A group of Veth adults, not many, maybe 15, gathered outside the police station. Not violently. Not armed. They simply stood there, quietly, and the gathered crowd drew attention, and the attention drew cameras, and the cameras drew more people, and within 2 hours there were 300 humans gathered on the other side of the street from the Veth, and some of them were not friendly. Marcus got the call and drove directly to the police station. The situation was not yet violent but had the particular electrical quality of a situation that could become violent quickly. A taut vibration in the crowd that Marcus had learned to recognize in his years of emergency management, the way you learn to recognize the shift in the air before weather turns. He parked the car and walked through the human crowd to the Veth group. He recognized several faces, community members from the center, people he had worked with. He stood with them facing the crowd. A voice from somewhere in the human gathering shouted something. He couldn't make out the words, but the tone was not ambiguous. Several others responded to the voice. The taut vibration intensified. Saren appeared at Marcus's elbow. He had not seen Saren arrive. "You don't have to stand here," Saren said quietly. "Yes I do," Marcus said. "This is not your conflict," Saren said. "This is absolutely my conflict," Marcus said. "You live here now. This is your neighborhood. And your children are in those houses a quarter-mile from where we're standing." He kept his eyes on the crowd. "No one is going to hurt your people tonight if I can help it." Saren was quiet. A police sergeant Marcus knew, a heavy-set man named Larry Rodriguez who had been quietly cooperative throughout the crisis months, appeared beside him. "Marcus," Larry said, "we're going to need the Veth to disperse. This is getting hot." "The Veth aren't doing anything," Marcus said. "They're standing on a public sidewalk." "I know that," Larry said. "But disperse the other crowd," Marcus said. "They're the ones getting hot." Larry looked at him for a long moment. Then he turned and started walking toward the human gathering, speaking into his radio. Marcus stayed where he was. It took 45 minutes. Additional police arrived. The human crowd slowly, grumbling and argumentative, dispersed. The Veth group stood quietly the entire time. When the crowd was gone, Saren turned to Marcus. "I did not expect you to stay," Saren said. "You keep not expecting things," Marcus said. "Yes," Saren said. "I am adjusting my expectations." He drove home at midnight and sat in his car in the driveway for a few minutes before going in. He thought about the teenager with the rock, and about the family in the warm structure, and about the crowd with its taut vibration, and about the Veth standing quietly, and about Larry Rodriguez making the right call. He thought about how fragile it all was. How many individual decisions and acts of decency had to stack up to make a good outcome happen, and how each of those decisions was made by a person who didn't have to make it that way, who could have made it the other way, and how the whole thing was built of those individual choices like a structure built from sand, not unstable, exactly, but requiring constant attention, constant work. He went inside. Sarah was awake, waiting. She made him tea, which he didn't drink but held, because the warmth of the mug in his hands felt like something. "Hard night," she said. "Not the worst," he said. "The right things happened. It just took longer than it should have." "That's most of it, isn't it?" Sarah said. "The right things happen just slower than they should." "Yeah," he said. "That's most of it." By the 10th month, Saren asked Marcus something he had not expected. "Teach me to drive," Saren said. Marcus blinked. They were in the community center, in the small office that had been set up for Saren's use as the informal community liaison. A role that had no official title but enormous practical significance, since Saren was the primary point of contact between the Newark Veth community and the constellation of agencies and organizations that Marcus coordinated. "You want to learn to drive," Marcus said. "I need to move between the 3 sites independently," Saren said. "I need to visit Aros, who is in the Zanesville site, and Vel, who is now working in the Xenia construction project. Currently I need a translator and a driver for every visit. This is inefficient." "It is inefficient," Marcus agreed. "But driving involves a license, and the licensing question for Veth is still being litigated." "Rachel told me," Saren said. Marcus had not been aware that Saren was in contact with Rachel Kim. He should have been less surprised than he was. Rachel believes there is a pathway through the Ohio BMV that would allow provisional driving permits for VETH adults during the legal resolution period. She is working on it. Of course she is, Marcus said. Okay. While she works on it, yes, I'll teach you to drive. He taught Saren to drive over 3 Sunday afternoons in the parking lot of a closed shopping center. The experience was novel. VETH physiology was well suited to driving in some ways, excellent spatial awareness, very fast reaction times, and less suited in others. The steering wheel proportions were wrong for VETH hand span, and Saren's instinct was to look at the mirrors too frequently, which Marcus had to correct. But Saren was a methodical learner, precise and self-correcting, and by the 3rd Sunday was driving around the parking lot with competence. In the car, during the stretches between instruction, they talked. It was in these driving lessons that Saren told Marcus about the directive. Not the broad outline, which Marcus already knew, but the specific story, the Compact Council meeting where the directive had been issued, and the VETH Council's debate about how to respond, and the vote. Saren had been present at the vote. Saren had been among the minority who had argued for compliance, not because they didn't believe in the principle, but because they had feared the consequences of refusal. I was wrong, Saren said. They were in the parking lot, car stopped, engine running, to argue for compliance. The vote went the other way and the vote was right. But I was afraid and I argued from fear and I am, a pause, I have thought about this many times. What the word is in your language. Not guilt. Something adjacent to guilt. The awareness that you were wrong. Regret, Marcus offered. Regret, Saren repeated, testing the word. Yes. I have regret about what I argued. The planet the Compact wanted to strip, we could not save it. We refused and they punished us, and they strip-mined it anyway with another species' labor. Our refusal accomplished nothing for that world. It accomplished something else, Marcus said. What? Marcus thought about how to say it. You're here, he said finally. Your community is here. And because you're here, because what happened and we responded the way we did, things are different than they would have been. The Earthy contacted us. The Compact is confused. And 6 million people who spent their whole lives in one star system are now, slowly, painfully, imperfectly, putting down roots in a new place. And the children are playing in the snow. Saren was quiet for a moment. That is a generous interpretation of events, Saren said. Maybe, Marcus said. But it's not wrong. You put the car in drive. Now I'm going to teach you parallel parking, he said. Which is the hardest thing humans learn to do, and we take it personally if you get it right faster than we did. Saren looked at him, and Marcus had learned by now to read the VETH expression with enough accuracy to be confident that what he was seeing was the VETH equivalent of a smile. The memory garden had grown beyond anyone's initial expectations. What had started as Patricia Walsh and arrows documenting one ecosystem had become, by the 10th month, a full research institution. The VETH Earth Biological Heritage Institute, formally established at Ohio State University, with 12 VETH scientists and 30 human counterparts. The work had expanded to cover not just the warm world's ecosystems but everything the VETH knew of the galaxy's biology. 3 centuries of Compact membership had given them access to biological data from dozens of worlds, much of it not otherwise documented in any human-accessible source. The scientific community's response had been extraordinary. The VETH data was unlike anything Earth scientists had encountered, entire branches of biological science that Earth hadn't yet conceived of, because Earth's biologists had only ever studied Earth life. The VETH, having observed 41 other sapient species and their associated worlds, had frameworks for understanding life that went so far beyond Earth science's current models that the first papers coming out of the Institute were causing genuine upheaval in biology departments worldwide. This scientific exchange had an unexpected political effect. It made the VETH valuable in a way that cut through some of the resistance and fear that lingered in political circles. Not that the VETH's right to humane treatment should have depended on their usefulness, but in the practical world of politics and policy, it helped. Senators who had been skeptical of VERA's more expansive provisions became more receptive when they understood that the VETH biological database was reshaping Earth's understanding of life itself. Marcus was not entirely comfortable with this, with the way they're useful to us could become a substitute for, they're people and people deserve dignity. He said as much to Rachel Kim during a strategy session. I know, Rachel said. But we use the tools we have. And once the political accommodation is made, the moral framework tends to catch up. People rationalize after they act in both directions. That's cynical, Marcus said. It's also true, Rachel said. It was also true. The emotional arc of the 10th month, though, was not the institute or the driving lessons or the political developments. It was something smaller and more personal. Aros was dying. The crossing, the transport from the warm world, had been hard on the elderly. Several had not survived it. Aros had survived but had been weakened, and the months of Earth had not restored what the crossing had taken. The Veth human medical team had done everything they could, and it had extended Aros's time but could not change its end. Marcus was told by Saren on a Tuesday morning. He went to the Zanesville site that afternoon, to the room in the warm structure where Aros had been given as comfortable an environment as could be arranged. The room was warm and dim, lit by Veth amber light, and several Veth were present, community members taking turns sitting with Aros. Patricia Walsh was there too, sitting quietly in the corner. Marcus sat beside Aros's sleeping platform for a while without speaking. Aros's breathing was slow, and the large dark eyes opened when Marcus sat down. The interpreter, a young Veth named Tef who had become one of the most skilled human Veth translators in the Ohio sites, was present. "You came," Aros said through Tef. "I came," Marcus said. A silence. "The memory garden," Aros said. "Patricia told me. It continues." "It continues," Marcus said. "Other scientists have joined. The work is going to go on." "Good," Aros said. And then after a pause, "I worried when we came here. That the knowing would die with me. That the names of the species, the patterns of the seasons, the behavior in the high altitude." A pause, a breath. "I worried that when I was gone, there would be nothing left." "There's everything left," Marcus said. "It's all recorded. Other scientists know it now. They're teaching it. They're publishing papers. The warm world's ecosystems, what you knew of them, they're alive in human scientific literature now. They'll be read for 100 years. Aros was quiet for a long moment. "I thought," Aros said slowly, "that when we came here it was the end of everything. The home gone. The memory going when we go." Pause. "But it is not an end. It is," and here Aros searched for the word and not finding it in English said something in the Veth language and Tef translated, "a transplanting. The roots moved to new soil." Marcus nodded. "HFY," Aros said, in what was clearly an attempt at the phrase Marcus had sometimes used to close the day's work, the Urdu phrase he used around the office without thinking, something his Pakistani-American colleague Dana had taught him and that had become a habit, meaning roughly, "from now on, from me." HFY, "from now on, from me." Aros had heard him use it and had asked what it meant and had apparently kept it. Marcus found, to his own considerable surprise, that he needed a moment. HFY, he said back. Aros died 3 days later, peacefully in the warm-lit room, with Saren and several community members and Patricia Walsh present. At the funeral, a Veth ceremony that Marcus attended alongside a dozen other humans who had worked with the community, Saren gave a memory-keeping address that was translated section by Tef. Saren spoke of Aros's work. Saren spoke of the warm world. And at the end, Saren said something that Marcus wrote down in his notebook verbatim. Aros feared that the knowing would die. It did not die. Humans caught it. This is the thing we did not expect of this world, that it would hold what we carried, that our memories would find new ground here. We did not come here as guests. We were thrown here. But we are learning, slowly, that throne can become planted. 14 months after landing day, the Compact did something it had never done in its 1,000-year history. It sent an envoy to a Level 3 world. The envoy arrived not in one of the enormous transport ships but in a smaller vessel, something sleek and dark that landed in a designated area near Washington, D.C. that had been prepared with characteristic American combination of official gravitas and barely contained chaos. The envoy was a species called the Morwen, one of the founding members of the Compact, tall and insectoid and communicating through sound patterns that required a translation device the size of a briefcase. The envoy's name, translated, was something approximately like Consideration Weighing Outcomes, which the American diplomatic team quickly abbreviated to Consideration for practical purposes. The meeting was at the State Department and Marcus was not there. He was not a diplomat and Washington was well supplied with people who were. But he followed the dispatches carefully, and he had a contact inside the diplomatic team who kept him informed beyond the official releases. Consideration had come, the envoy said, to assess the situation. The Compact's models had indicated certain expected outcomes that had not materialized. The Compact was interested in understanding why. The American Secretary of State, a woman named Diane Holloway who had spent 30 years in multilateral diplomacy and was the best prepared human being on Earth for this particular moment, received Consideration with a particular kind of polite, absolutely steel-spined cordiality that is the highest art form of professional diplomacy. She had, Marcus's contact told him, prepared a presentation. The presentation was not what Consideration had expected. It was not a request for compensation or a complaint about the Veth dumping, or a demand for recognition in compact law or a threat. It was a summary of the past 14 months. 14 months of logistics and community centers and driving lessons and medical collaborations and the memory garden and the warm structures and a 73-year-old music teacher teaching Veth children to sing, "You Are My Sunshine." "We have done this," Secretary Holloway said, "with no resources from the compact, no advance notice, no infrastructure support and no recognition in compact law. We have housed, fed, educated and integrated 6 million beings into our world in 14 months. While simultaneously managing our own world's ordinary crises. We have done this because our civilization, for all its many flaws, has a value that your compact classification system does not have a category for. I believe you call such things anomalies. We call it compassion." She paused. "The compact deposited 6 million refugees on our planet as a punishment. I want you to understand something clearly. It did not feel like a punishment. It felt like a responsibility. And we accepted it." Consideration was quiet for what the translation device indicated was approximately 45 seconds. "You want recognition," Consideration said. "Status in compact law." "We want nothing from the compact at this time," Secretary Holloway said. "We are informing the compact of the current situation, as it is clearly of interest to you. We are also informing the compact that we consider the Veth to be residents of Earth, under our protection. Any further actions by the compact that affect Veth residents of Earth will be considered actions that affect Earth. Whether Earth has standing in compact law is, as you point out, an open question. It is one the compact may wish to reconsider." Another long pause. "The compact," Consideration said finally, "is observing this situation." "Yes," Secretary Holloway said pleasantly. "So are the Earthy." The meeting ended 3 hours later. Marcus heard about the Earthy comment from his contact, who described it as, the moment the room temperature changed. He laughed, alone in his office at 11 p.m. with a cold cup of coffee, and then felt a little bad about laughing because it was probably not good diplomatic form to enjoy scoring a point on an interstellar governing body. He called Saren. It was late, but he had established early in their friendship that Saren kept unconventional hours. The Veth sleep cycle was slightly different from the human one, and Saren tended to be awake at times when Marcus was and asleep at times when Marcus wasn't. They had worked this out with a simple text protocol, a single message asking if Saren was awake and Saren would respond or not. Saren responded. "The compact sent an envoy," Marcus said when Saren called back. "We know," Saren said. "Our contacts informed us before the meeting. We have been," a pause, "we have been very anxious." "The secretary was extraordinary," Marcus said. "You should see the transcript when it's released." "What did she say?" Marcus summarized the meeting, including the final exchange. When he finished, there was a silence on Saren's end that went on long enough that he said, "Saren? Are you there?" "I am here," Saren said. "I am," another pause. "The compact has never sent an envoy to a pre-contact world. In 300 years of membership, I have never heard of the compact sending an envoy to a level 3 world." "I know," Marcus said. "They are afraid," Saren said, and Marcus heard something in Saren's voice he hadn't heard before, not triumph but something that was adjacent to it, something earned and considered and containing within it the weight of everything the last 14 months had cost. "They expected you to prove their model of you. And instead you are changing what the model means." "We're trying," Marcus said. "Marcus," Saren said, and the way Saren said his name had changed over 14 months, it had become comfortable, the familiarity of people who have built something together. "Caro, I need to use that word correctly. It means?" "In Urdu," Marcus said, "Caro is the imperative form. Do it. Make it happen." Dana uses it like a push. When she says Caro she means stop talking and start doing. "Caro," Saren said, tasting the word. "Then I will use it as she uses it. Caro, what do we do next?" Marcus leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling. "We keep building," he said. "We keep building and we let the compact watch us build, and eventually the thing we're building becomes too real to ignore." "And the Earthy?" Saren asked. "And the Earthy," Marcus said. "We talk to them. We find out what they know. We make friends." "You are good at making friends," Saren said, and the warmth in that voice across the phone line in the late Ohio night was unmistakable. The second year began with spring, and spring on Earth was something the Veth experienced for the first time. They had had nothing like it on the warm world. There had been wet seasons, cooler periods, variations in the growth cycles of the fungal forests. But the specific transformation of a temperate climate spring, the snow receding, the ground returning from white and gray to brown and then to the first impossible green, the sudden explosion of blossoms on trees that had appeared dead all winter, was not something they had a framework for. Marcus was at the Newark site on a morning in late March when a Veth child, not Saren's community's small girl but a boy from one of the other hearth networks, perhaps 9 years old, came running across the field and grabbed Saren's sleeve and pointed at something and said something emphatic in rapid Veth. Saren crouched down and looked where the child was pointing. There was a crocus. A single purple crocus, pushing up through a patch of ground where the snow had melted near the south-facing wall of one of the warm structures. "He has never seen a flower," Saren said to Marcus. Marcus crouched down too. The three of them regarded the crocus. "The warm world didn't have flowers?" Marcus asked. "Not like this," Saren said. "We had reproductive structures in the fungal forms, we had color, we had growth. But not this shape. This particular kind of opening." The child said something looking at Marcus. "He wants to know," Saren said, "what it is doing. Why it opens." Marcus thought about how to explain this to a 9-year-old of a different species. "It's showing the sun it's here," he said. "It's been underground all winter waiting. Now the sun is warmer and it can come out. So it opens up and shows itself." Saren translated. The child listened, still crouching, still looking at the crocus. The child said something back. "He says," Saren translated, "that it is like us. Underground all winter. Now coming out." Marcus looked at the child and at the crocus and at the vast improbable journey that had brought a 9-year-old Veth boy to crouch in the Ohio mud and find himself in a purple flower. "Yes," he said. "Exactly like you." The second year brought changes that built on the first year's foundations. The legal situation for Veth residents had been significantly clarified by a combination of legislation and court decisions. VERA had been superseded by the more comprehensive Veth Residency and Rights Act, VRRA, which established for Veth residents a status analogous to permanent residency, with a pathway to citizenship that was being carefully legislated. Veth adults could now legally work, enter contracts, own property and access the banking system. Veth children born on Earth after a specific date were eligible for birthright citizenship. The Veth economy, such as it was, had begun to take shape. The materials technology consulting practice that several Veth engineers had started had become a genuine company, partnering with 2 major American manufacturers on production processes. Veth architects, working with Frank Kowalski's firm, had spun out their own practice and were now designing not just Veth housing but hybrid human Veth community spaces that were being written about in architectural publications as a new design language. The community restaurant that the Veth chef had been operating informally had been properly licensed and was booked 6 weeks in advance, and 2 others had opened in the Columbus metropolitan area. The Veth Earth Biological Heritage Institute had published its first major collaborative paper, a foundational work on multi-world ecosystem theory that appeared in Nature and promptly became the most cited biology paper of the year. Arrows was credited as lead author, posthumously, by Patricia Walsh's insistence. The paper's abstract ended with a dedication, "To Arrows who remembered everything. HFY." Rachel Kim had become the leading attorney in what was a rapidly developing area of American law, non-human persons' rights, and had co-written with a Veth legal scholar named Dara, a framework document that was being used by courts across the country and had been adopted in several international legal contexts as well. She and Vel the architect were now, Marcus confirmed with great satisfaction, a couple living in Columbus, sharing what he understood to be a very small apartment with an enormous collection of architectural models. Saren had gotten a driver's license. The Ohio BMV had issued the first Veth driving license on the basis of Rachel Kim's provisional permit framework, and there had been a small amount of press, and then the press had moved on because there were many more significant things happening. Saren drove a used Honda Civic that Marcus had helped select and now referred to with the kind of affectionate ownership that humans develop for their first car. "It makes a noise," Saren told Marcus, having pulled up to the community center in the Civic. "What kind of noise?" Marcus asked. "A clicking sound. When I turn left." "That's the turn signal," Marcus said. "It makes a clicking sound to tell you and other drivers that you're turning." "I know what a turn signal is," Saren said with dignity. "The click is different from the normal click." "Lower." Marcus listened. He heard the noise. "That's the blinker fluid," he said, entirely straight-faced. Saren looked at him. "There is no such thing as blinker fluid," Saren said after a pause during which Marcus failed to maintain a straight face. I have read every automotive maintenance manual available in English. You have? Marcus agreed. It's a joke. I'll look at the turn signal housing. It's probably fine. Was fine. The earthy dialogue had progressed, carefully and slowly, through the State Department and a small dedicated team that Marcus was not part of but was briefed on through Saren's contacts. The earthy were not offering anything concrete. They were a cautious species with their own complex reasons for maintaining distance from the compact, and their willingness to communicate with Earth did not translate immediately into alliance or assistance. But they were communicating, which was itself significant, and in the communications there were hints of a broader picture. The compact, it appeared, had more internal divisions than its unified exterior suggested. Several of the 41 member species had objected, in varying degrees, to the decision to expel the Veth. The compact's consensus model required supermajority votes for major actions, and the Veth expulsion had passed 28 to 13, not close but far from unanimous. The 13 who had voted against the expulsion were not uniformly sympathetic to the Veth, and their objections had been based on a variety of concerns from the principled to the pragmatic, but they existed. They were watching Earth. And something else was watching Earth. The compact's legal framework, Saren had explained many months earlier, had a provision, rarely invoked in the compact's history, called evidential reclassification. Under this provision, a species that had been classified as non-sapient by the compact's standards could petition for reclassification if it could demonstrate evidence of meeting the sapience criteria. The criteria were multiple and complex, but they included one that Earth now, arguably, met: successful integration of a displaced sapient population. It had never been used as a criterion before, but it was in the law. And the earthy, in their careful communications, had mentioned it. Marcus heard about this from Saren, who had heard it from the diplomatic team, who had heard it from the earthy. He sat with it for several days. We didn't do this to qualify for reclassification, he said to Saren when they talked about it. No, Saren agreed. We did it because 6 million people needed help, Marcus said. Yes, Saren said. And that is precisely why the argument is strong, Saren said. If you had done it for strategic benefit, the compact would find ways to dismiss it. But it is, what is your phrase? It is on the record. What you did and when you did it and what you knew at the time. You did not know about evidential reclassification. You did not know about the earthy. You knew only that there were people in a field. And we came anyway, Marcus said. And you came anyway, Saren said. HFY. 22 months after landing day, Earth received a formal communication from the Galactic Compact. Not a broadcast to all frequencies. Not an intercepted transmission. A formal diplomatic communication addressed to the governments of Earth, transmitted through the same channel that consideration weighing outcomes had established during the Washington visit. The communication notified Earth that a petition of evidential reclassification had been submitted to the Compact's legal committee. The petition had been submitted by the 13 member species who had voted against the Veth expulsion, acting in a formal legal coalition. The petition argued that Earth had demonstrated sufficient evidence of sapient-level moral reasoning and social complexity to warrant reclassification from Level 3 to Level 1, full sapient status under compact law, and that this reclassification should be accompanied by a formal review of the Veth expulsion decision. The petition had no guaranteed outcome. The legal committee could reject it. The full council could vote it down. The process could take years. But it had been submitted. And in the submission something had changed. Earth was no longer a disposal site. Earth was, at minimum, an entity the compact was being asked to look at directly and see clearly. Marcus heard about the petition in the same way he heard about most significant developments, through Saren, who heard about it through the Veth Communities Network, which heard about it faster than the official diplomatic channels because 3 centuries of compact membership had taught the Veth a great deal about how information actually moved through the galaxy. He was in the community center when Saren told him. It was a Tuesday evening, which Marcus had come to think of as significant, given that the original Tuesday of landing day had been the most consequential Tuesday in human history. Perhaps Tuesdays were like that, he thought, ordinary containers for extraordinary contents. It could take years, Marcus said. Yes, Saren said. The outcome is not certain. No. And even if Earth is reclassified, the Compact's attitude doesn't change overnight. There's still 41 member species, most of whom didn't vote for the petition. This is all true, Saren said. Marcus sat with this for a moment. But, he said. But, Saren agreed. But it happened. The petition was submitted. The 13 who objected exist. The Earthy are watching. And Earth is on record. And the Veth are on Earth, Saren said. And the Memory Garden exists. And Rachel Kim exists. And Dorothy Hayes taught our children to sing. And you drove out to a field in the dark because people were sitting in it? Pause. None of this can be undone. However the vote goes, this exists. Marcus thought about Aro's and the Crocus and Lily's drawings and the police station and Frank Kowalski and Patricia Walsh's dedication to Aro's memory and the warm structures and 6 million people slowly, stubbornly, painfully putting down roots in Ohio and Oklahoma and Portugal and Korea and Nigeria and everywhere else they had landed on a planet that had been selected as an adequate engine of their suffering. We're going to be okay, he said. Yes, Saren said. I believe we are. The vote on the petition when it came, did not come quickly. It came in stages as the Compact's legal committee deliberated and heard arguments and requested documentation and deliberated some more. Earth's diplomatic team, now for the first time in history, appearing in a formal legal capacity before a Compact committee through a video channel the Earthy had helped establish, presented the record of the past 22 months. The record was substantial. But the emotional center of the case, the part that Marcus heard about later, that his diplomatic contact described as the moment when the temperature in the room changed, was not a legal argument. It was a testimony. Saren had been asked through the diplomatic channels if the Veth community would be willing to provide testimony to the Compact committee. Not about the expulsion itself, that was a separate case, but about what had happened on Earth. About what humanity had done. Saren had agreed. And Saren had spoken for 2 hours before the Compact committee, in the Veth language with interpretation provided by Tef. Saren had spoken about the first night, and the man who had walked across a dark field to ask if anyone was injured. Saren had spoken about Carol with her trucks. Saren had spoken about Aro's and Patricia and the Memory Garden and the crocuses in the spring. Saren had spoken about Lily Webb's drawings. At the end, Saren said, and this was the part Marcus's contact underlined 3 times in his notes, you deposited us on this world as a punishment. You expected the inhabitants to complete our suffering. Instead they completed our rescue. I stand before this committee as evidence. Not evidence of what humanity is capable of at its worst. Evidence of what humanity is capable of at its best. HFY, from now on from me. That is what they offered us. From now on. Not your history, not your worst days, not your worst instincts. From now on. I asked this committee to look at what they built in 2 years and to see it clearly. The legal committee deliberated for 4 more months. Then they voted. The petition was upheld 8-3. Earth was formally reclassified. The reclassification announcement came on a Wednesday morning in June. The planet's northern hemisphere summer, the kind of morning where the air was warm and soft and the light came through the community center windows and long golden bars and landed on the floor where a group of Veth children were doing something with colored chalk, drawing elaborate interconnected shapes that one of them had explained to Marcus was a traditional Veth symbol for the web. He was there when the news came through. He was there because he was usually there in the mornings when the day's work needed to start. He was holding his coffee. He was thinking about a supply chain issue in the Xenia site that needed to be resolved before the end of the week. His phone buzzed. His contact at state, a one-word text, upheld. He stood very still for approximately 4 seconds. Then he went to find Saren. The celebrations were different in different communities. In the Newark site, and in Veth communities across the country and the world, the Veth marked the news with a ceremony that Saren translated approximately as the naming of new ground, a ritual in which a community formally acknowledges the land it now occupies, not as a temporary shelter but as a home. The ceremony involved planting or the symbolic representation of planting, and the speaking of the community's history, and the making of the web symbol, that interconnected shape the children had been drawing with chalk. In the Newark community the planting was real. A garden had been started the previous spring in a cleared area near the warm structures. A kitchen garden primarily, growing the earth plants that Veth nutrition could incorporate. The naming ceremony involved each family bringing a seed and planting it in the garden. Marcus was invited. He attended with Sarah and Lily. Lily had, by this point, spent so much time at the community center that she knew several of the children by name and communicated with them in a mixture of English and learned Veth phrases and the universal child language of drawing and gesture. She walked into the community area with the particular ease of a child who knows she is welcome. Saren greeted all 3 of them. Marcus had introduced Saren to Sarah several months earlier, but this was the first time all 4 of them had been in the same place for a significant occasion, and he noticed the way Saren and Sarah sized each other up with the quiet mutual evaluation of people who are important to someone they both care about. Sarah was a high school English teacher, calm and perceptive and warm in a way that didn't announce itself. She looked at Saren for a moment and then said simply, "Thank you for looking after him." Saren looked at Marcus and then back at Sarah. "He looked after us," Saren said. "He did," Sarah said. "He also needed someone to look after him. I can only be in so many places." Something shifted in Saren's expression, that readable becoming readable shift, the warmth around the eyes. "I did not realize," Saren said. "I will be more attentive." "You already are," Sarah said. "He comes home calmer after a long day when he's talked to you. I notice these things." Marcus opened his mouth, found nothing useful to say and closed it. Lily tugged Saren's sleeve. She had brought seeds, sunflower seeds, her own choice because she liked the way sunflowers were tall and faced the sun. She held them up. "Can I plant mine with your people?" she asked. Saren crouched down to Lily's level. "Yes," Saren said. "We would be honored." The planting happened as the afternoon light went long and golden over the Ohio field. Each family planted in turn, with the speaking of the community's history between each planting, Saren's voice moving through the gathered community, holding the stories that a memory keeper holds, the weight of every name and every loss and every small act of resilience over 2 years on this new ground. Marcus stood with his family and listened to a language he only partially understood and watched the sun go down over a field where 600 children were growing up in 2 languages and making friends across a species boundary that was, one friendship at a time, becoming an ordinary thing. He thought about the compact and the reclassification and what might come next, the Veth expulsion case which was still in review, the potential for Earth to eventually have formal representation, the relationship with the Earthy and whatever other species were watching, the vast, slow movement of interstellar politics that he would not live to see fully resolve. He thought about all of it and then he set it aside because it was not the most important thing in this particular moment. The most important thing in this particular moment was Lily's sunflower seeds going into the ground, and Saren's voice carrying the community's history across the warm June evening, and Sarah's hand in his, and the web symbol drawn in chalk on the path, connecting every planted thing to every other. He thought about what Aros had said, "Throne can become planted." It had happened. It was still happening. The years that followed did not conform to a single, clean narrative arc. History never does. There were more crises and more difficulties and more moments where the fragile thing that had been built seemed in danger of breaking. There were political setbacks and there were ugly incidents and there were periods of exhaustion and doubt. But there were also the other things. The Warm World Memorial, a collaboration between Veth artists and human architects, built in the field outside Newark where the first ships had landed, was visited by hundreds of thousands of people in its first year. Its design, entirely Vels, incorporated both the fungal forest structures of the warm world and Ohio's native prairie plants, growing together in a space that was neither one world nor the other but something new. The Memory Garden database, now hosted jointly by 12 major universities across 6 countries, published its 1,000th paper in the 4th year. It had become one of the most significant scientific resources in human history, and the work Aros had feared would die with them was now being taught in biology courses worldwide. Dorothy Hayes died in the 3rd year at age 76, still teaching at the community center 3 days a week until 6 weeks before her death. Her memorial was held in the community center, and the Veth community sang at it. A complex, layered piece in the Veth vocal tradition, composed specifically in her memory by a young Veth composer who had grown up in the Newark community and had learned music from her. The singing was described by every person who heard it as the most beautiful thing they had ever heard. 3 separate recordings were uploaded to streaming services and went, collectively, listened to over 400 million times. 7 years after landing day, Earth received a second formal communication from the Galactic Compact. This one Marcus heard about in real time because he was in Washington, consulting for a federal working group on the second wave of policy questions that the Veth-Earth relationship had generated, when the communication came through. It was not a broadcast. It was not a legal notice. It was a formal invitation. Earth was invited to send a delegation to the Compact's next General Assembly. Not as a petitioner. Not as a subject of review. As an observer, which was, under the Compact's framework, the first formal step toward membership consideration. Observers could attend sessions. Observers could be addressed. Observers were, in the careful language of Compact protocol, recognized as entities of interest. Marcus sat in the conference room where the State Department team had gathered to discuss the invitation and thought about recognized as entities of interest and thought, in spite of himself, about the man who had walked across a dark field to ask if anyone was hurt. He was asked to speak because he was present, and because his name was known in the room in the particular way that names become known when a person has spent 7 years building something in public. He thought about what to say. He said, "We didn't do this to be recognized. We didn't do this to get into any club. We did it because people were sitting in a field and it seemed wrong not to come. But we're here now and we go from here, and the question is what we do with the position we're in. I think we do the same thing we've been doing. We keep building. We keep showing up. We keep being the version of ourselves that 6 million people needed us to be on the worst day of their lives. And we go to that assembly and we sit in that room and we say clearly to every species present, we're not here to seek advantage. We're here because we believe that how you treat the displaced and the desperate is the most fundamental measure of what you are. We showed them what we were. Now we show everyone else." He sat down. The room was quiet for a moment. Then Janet Bloom, who had driven down from Columbus specifically for this meeting and who was sitting in the row behind Marcus, leaned forward and put her hand briefly on his shoulder, which was the most demonstrative thing Janet Bloom had done in 30 years of professional life, and said nothing because nothing needed to be said. On a Tuesday in September, 7 years and 5 months after landing day, Marcus Webb drove to the Newark field. He was not working that day. He had taken the day off specifically to do nothing official. No meetings, no coordination, no problem solving. He brought his coffee in the cup holder and there was still a drawing on the dashboard, not the original Lily horse drawing which was framed now on the wall of his home office, but a new drawing, done by his son James, who was 3 years old and who had inherited his sister's conviction that all animals should be drawn with large smiles. He walked across the field where 60,000 Veth had sat in the dark on the night everything changed, and he stood in front of the Warm World Memorial. Vel had designed it to change with the seasons. In winter, the prairie grasses were dormant and the Veth fungal structures that had been artfully incorporated into the design were most visible, their surfaces picking up whatever light was available and reflecting it softly. In spring and summer, the native plants grew up around and through and into the Veth design elements, until you couldn't always tell which part was which species. In September, the prairie grasses were in their golden phase, and the memorial was full of that specific end-of-summer light, and something of it looked to Marcus's eye like the amber glow that Veth lighting made. Saren found him there. He hadn't told Saren he was coming, but the community was smaller than it had been. Many Veth had moved into Columbus and the surrounding towns in the years since the first crisis, and word traveled and Saren had come. They stood together in front of the memorial. 7 years, Marcus said. 7 years, Saren agreed. What do you think when you stand here? Marcus asked. Saren considered the question with the focused care that Saren brought to questions that deserved it. I think, Saren said, of what Aros said. Throne can become planted. I think of, a pause. I think of a word in your language that took me a long time to understand. Oh. In Veth, the nearest word means the place of origin, the place where your roots began. It carries the assumption that it is a specific place, a single place, the first place. You have a different use. I have heard your people say they feel at home in a place they were not born in. A place they chose. I did not understand this for a long time. I understand it now. Are you home? Marcus asked. Saren looked at the memorial and at the field and at the community that was visible in the middle distance. Children running, adults talking, the daily ordinary life that had been built from nothing in 7 years. HFY, Saren said. I am. Marcus looked at the same things. He thought about the ordinariness of the original Tuesday, the coffee, the podcast, the drawing on the dashboard. He thought about the sky full of ships. He thought about Lily's sunflower seeds going into the ground. He thought about the Compact's invitation. He thought about an envoy to a General Assembly, and what it might mean and all the long uncertain miles of it still ahead. He thought about a thing that was true that he sometimes forgot and sometimes needed to remember because it is the kind of thing that gets lost in logistics and legal frameworks and political negotiations. That the reason any of it had worked, the reason 6 million people were home on a world that had not been theirs, the reason Earth was being invited to a galactic assembly, the reason any of it had changed, was not strategy, and was not diplomacy and was not even formal compassion in the organized institutional sense. It was the first night. It was a man getting out of his car in the dark and walking toward a group of strangers who had nowhere to go, with his hands open and empty. That was all it was at the beginning. That was all it needed to be. The Compact in its 1,000-year history had seen species rise and fall. It had seen civilizations expand and contract and transform. It had developed, over those centuries, a sophisticated taxonomy of sapient life. categories for intelligence, for complexity, for developmental stage. It had a word for every kind of civilization it had encountered. It did not have a word in its current lexicon for what Earth was. Earth was not a young civilization that had surprised its observers by surviving contact. Earth was not a civilization that had demonstrated sufficient technological advancement to qualify for recognition. Earth was not, by any standard the Compact had previously applied, remarkable. And yet the Compact's legal committee had voted. The General Assembly had issued the invitation. The 13 species who had objected to the Veth expulsion were, in private channels that the diplomatic team was slowly learning to access, cautiously optimistic. And the Earthy, the cautious, observing, non-aligned Earthy, had sent Earth a message through their established channel that was, in its way, more meaningful than any of the official Compact communications. The message read, "You were not what we expected. In a very long time, nothing has been what we did not expect." The nearest translation is refreshing. The Earthy do not say this lightly. "We look forward to knowing you." Secretary Holloway, when she read the message, was reported by her staff to have smiled in a way that was not her usual diplomatic smile. Not the professional smile, but the real one, the one that changes the whole face. She had written back, "We look forward to knowing you too. We are still learning what we are. We expect we will continue to be surprised by ourselves." Marcus Webb drove home from the memorial in the golden September afternoon, with his coffee in the cup holder and his son's drawing on the dashboard and a podcast playing through the speakers. He was thinking about the delegation list for the Compact Assembly, not because it was his job to compile it, but because these things occupied him, the logistics of extraordinary situations. He was thinking about what the assembly chamber would look like and how human voices would sound in it, and whether the translators the Earthy were providing would capture nuance or only meaning, and whether nuance was separable from meaning, and whether any of the 41 member species would look at the Earth delegation and see what they expected to see. He thought they probably would. At first, he thought humans probably looked to eyes calibrated for different seeing, like exactly what the Compact's models predicted. A young species, territorial, still working out the basics, not ready for the complexity of interstellar politics. He thought that was fine. He thought about what Secretary Holloway had written. "We are still learning what we are." He thought that was the most honest thing anyone had said about humanity in a long time. They were still learning. They would keep learning. They would get things wrong as they had gotten things wrong for the entire history of their species, in ways both trivial and catastrophic. They would also get things right in the way that they had gotten things right over the last 7 years. Imperfectly, slowly, inadequately in some ways and magnificently in others, but persistently and with the specific human stubbornness that looked at a field full of strangers in the dark and said someone should do something, and then did something. He pulled into his driveway. He sat in the car for a moment. He thought about a 7-year-old Lily putting a sunflower seed in the ground. He thought about Saren saying, "I am home." He thought about the crocus in the Ohio mud, pushing up through the snow-cold ground in the first spring, and a 9-year-old Veth boy seeing it for the first time, and the explanation Marcus had given. "It's been underground all winter waiting. Now it can come out. So it opens up and shows itself." He got out of the car. He went inside. Sarah was in the kitchen with James, who was at the age where everything was interesting and who was currently interrogating a wooden spoon with the philosophical intensity of a 2-year-old. Lily, 14 now, taller than her mother, already talking about interspecies communication programs, was at the kitchen table doing homework. She looked up when Marcus came in. "You went to the memorial," she said. Not a question. "Yeah," he said. "How was it?" He thought about Saren saying "I am home." He thought about Aros's drawing hands. He thought about Dorothy Hayes and the children singing. He thought about the crocus. "It was good," he said. "The prairie grasses are in. You should go see it before the season changes." "I'll go with Sarah," Lily said. She had, over the years, developed the habit of slightly shortening Veth names in the casual way of someone who grew up knowing them. "Maybe this weekend." "That would be nice," Marcus said. He went and sat down at the kitchen table and helped James interrogate the wooden spoon, and Sarah put dinner on, and Lily did her homework, and the ordinary evening happened around him in all its ordinary weight and beauty. Outside, the September light went golden and then copper and then the soft purple of early dark. The stars came out. They were still up there, the Compact, the Earthy, the 41 member species and however many non-member species and the vast organized complexity of a galaxy that had, for 1,000 years, not noticed Earth, and had then noticed it in the worst possible way, and had then been surprised by what it saw. They were still watching. Good, Marcus thought. Let them watch. Let them watch the sunflower seeds and the driving lessons and the music and the memory garden and the crocuses in the spring. Let them watch Dorothy Hayes crying at a song, and Lily's drawings passed between children across a species boundary, and Rachel Kim finding the exact provision in a law that no one had imagined would ever be needed. Let them watch Frank Kowalski and Vel the architect building a new design language that belonged to both worlds. Let them watch Aros's hands and Aros's voice in Patricia's recordings, and the 1,000 papers in a database where a whole lost world still lived. Let them watch all of it. The quiet parts. The parts that don't broadcast themselves. Because that is what humanity is. Not only, and not always, and not without failure and cruelty and all the dark things that the Compact's models had correctly noted. But also, irrevocably, persistently, stubbornly, this. The person who gets out of the car in the dark. The hands open and empty. The question asked without knowing the answer. Is anyone hurt? Is anyone in need? And then the doing. Caro. HFY. From now on from me. Indy. Author's note to the story. The title of this story contains a challenge. Every version of humanity that has ever existed has been confronted with the question of what to do when strangers arrive in need. History records both answers, the cruelty and the compassion. Neither one is the whole of what we are. But the compassion is real. It exists. It is evidenced in the record of 10,000 quiet acts that no one broadcast, that crossed no interstellar distance, that the Compact's models did not capture. This story is dedicated to everyone who, in the presence of need, got out of the car. The end.